An Olympic appearance up in smoke, but should THC be a banned substance? We'll talk with Heisman Trophy winner, NFL great, and cannabis enthusiast Ricky Williams about Sha'Carri Richardson's failed drug test. Plus, policing in America getting more dangerous. We'll speak to Boston's former police superintendent about how departments deal with a surge in shootings. And the U.S. has seen a drastic slowdown in vaccinations for COVID. What does it mean for the end of the pandemic, and just how dangerous and troubling is the Delta variant? The Donlon Report starts right now. Good evening. Great to have you with us. Tropical storm Elsa came ashore this morning and continues her path up the eastern seaboard at this hour. Here's a look at where Elsa is tonight after coming ashore along the North Florida Gulf Coast. It did build to hurricane strength when it was in the Gulf, but lost some speed, dropped to that tropical storm this morning when it made landfall. We are off to a faster start to the hurricane season, already ahead of last year's pace of storms, which, by the way, was a record. So Elsa pushing through Georgia tonight, and that's where Janelle Fort is for us. Janelle, I know it's been a busy day for you storm chasing, and as I look at the map, it appears you're right in the path of Elsa. What's the latest on the conditions?
Yeah, Joe, can't you tell? We just learned just a few moments ago that there is a confirmed tornado that touched down in Jacksonville, Florida. One person confirmed dead, and now that storm is working its way, as you said, up the eastern shoreboard. Where we are right now, we're about 80 miles northwest of Jacksonville, and you can just see how this storm is battering us here. We're in Waycross, Georgia. I want to give you a look at some of the conditions. This is the major road here. Across the street is South Georgia State College, and you can just see this rain pouring down on the ground there. You can see how the winds kind of have the rain pushing along, and this has just started over the course of probably the last 30 or so minutes as we were driving and working our ways down here. A lot of things to look out for with this storm. We're looking at the threat of potential flash flooding. We're looking at 2 to 4 inches, 6 inches in some places. And then, of course, as we saw in Jacksonville, also the threat of potential tornadoes as this storm system makes its way through here. So it's just a matter of, fortunately, we haven't seen a lot of widespread damage except for what we saw in Jacksonville, but we'll just have to wait and see what happens here in Georgia as Elsa makes its way through, Joe.
Well, we can see the sheets of rain coming down behind you there, Janelle. Janelle Ford live for us tonight in Waycross. Thank you for the update. We appreciate it. Well, the storm missed the Miami area, but it did impact the search for survivors in Surfside, where rescue crews had to stop their efforts for a brief time because of the lightning and high winds. And we do have a late update now. Just came in this afternoon. Search and rescue operation that was underway there has now shifted to a recovery operation, which essentially acknowledges that despite an incredible effort and 2 weeks of digging, those rescue crews no longer expect to find any survivors from that condo collapse. Fire officials reportedly told family members today in a private meeting, just based on the facts, there is zero chance for survival. The death toll tonight has risen to 54, with 86 still unaccounted for. From the weather, we pivot now to the storm over the coronavirus vaccine, especially amid the rise of the highly contagious Delta variant. Polling by ABC and the Washington Post shows this divide on the vaccine is largely along party lines. According to the poll, about 1/5 of Americans don't plan to get the vaccine. Of that, nearly 40% are Republicans, with less than 10% saying they were Democrats. Joining me now, John Moore, professor of microbiology and immunology. The main group not getting vaccinated at this point, John, also we should point out, is the younger crowd between 18 and 30. And now we're starting to see outbreaks at summer camps. What is the end result of that?
Well, the end result is the pandemic won't go away. The Delta variant, as you said, is highly contagious. It's the most contagious variant that's yet emerged during the pandemic. It devastated India. It's spreading through Asia. It's now responsible for essentially 100% of all the infections in the UK, and it's going to be the dominant strain in the USA within a few weeks. But the good news is it's not really a problem for fully vaccinated people. They will still retain almost all of their protection against it. Studies out of Israel have publicized in the last few days show that the Pfizer vaccine is still over 93% effective at preventing people getting severe COVID and death. So we're in a two Americas situation, the vaccinated and the non-vaccinated.
Yeah, I want to talk about more on that topic in just a minute, but you touched on something that I also wanted to ask you about. What's the big deal with this? There are some who understand, okay, this is a personal decision to get the vaccine or not, but what it means in the end is the virus continues to mutate and the people who are not vaccinated continue to get it. What does it mean in the long run, though? Does this allow the virus to continue to spread and mutate to a point perhaps where the vaccine isn't effective?
Well, that's a theoretical concern. It may or may not happen, but it does mean that we won't be pandemic free, we won't be COVID free in America until vaccine uptake reaches 70, 80% in all parts of the country. It's going to be patchy. In the Northeast, I'm in New York City, we have a very high vaccine uptake rate and there is very little virus spread and life is pretty normal. The same is true in the major California cities, but in parts of the South where vaccine uptake rates are in the 30% range, that's problematic because when Delta reaches that part of the country and spreads, as it will, there are going to be a lot more sick and dying people, I'm afraid.
Right. In your opinion, do you think we've hit a vaccine ceiling? In other words, people who want it now have gotten it, and for the most part, those who don't want it are not going to get it?
We might be close to that point, unfortunately, and there's going to be different outreaches needed for different people. I had an email tonight from a man in Brooklyn who was nervous and he wanted some reassurance, and you can talk to that on a one-on-one basis, but you can't do that for 1 million people. There are underserved minority communities that are still distrustful for historic reasons. They need reassuring and better forms of education from leaders of their own community that they might pay more attention to. But the real hardcore vaccine refuseniks, the 20, 30% of Americans that track Republican voting, there's very little that can be done about them because they get their information from highly dubious sources. If you read QAnon, if you pay attention to Fox News, if you read your granny's Facebook feed and she passes on something with very dubious provenance and you persuade yourself that that is true, you're not going to get a vaccine because you're believing information that is fundamentally flawed. It's the information gap. We're well aware of it, and it's having a tragic impact on vaccination programs.
Well, here's another headline that perhaps might help. The Washington Post article that I found today points out everyone who died from COVID in the state of Maryland last month was not vaccinated. So what do you say to those folks who are against it, period?
Well, if I could reach out to the people who get their information sources from sites that I don't inhabit, I would tell them that it will stop you dying because there are going to be a lot more deaths in America. I mean, that Maryland figure was particularly striking, but there were stories last week that 99% of the deaths in America from COVID over the past month were in non-vaccinated people. Mm-hmm. And the same is being seen in the UK, which also has a high vaccine uptake rate. So, yeah, the vaccines will stop you dying. And when Delta reaches your communities and spreads, a lot more people in the South and Wyoming and other low vaccine states are going to die. And it's entirely avoidable. And that's the tragedy of it all.
The other reason I've heard a lot of people state, even on this broadcast, is that they want to wait for this vaccine to get fully approved instead of the emergency approval that it has right now. So they would rather wait as long as possible until they get to that point. I guess to that point, how long do you think that might take, and what would you say to those folks?
Well, to medical professionals, the current authorization and full approval is essentially a distinction without a difference because we understand the process that led to the emergency use was pretty thorough and very transparent and persuaded us all and our family members to take the vaccine. So we don't see it as a big deal, but I can understand how members of the public are still using this as a reason to say we need more information, we need longer time, more data, we need longer term studies. So I understand that, and it would certainly help if the FDA approved the original first Pfizer and Moderna vaccines as soon as possible. Pfizer, I believe, has filed for the full approval, and it's likely granted in the next few months. You know, it's hard to judge the timelines of the government agency, but that kind of ballpark.
Right. And so the bottom line to you is that, I mean, hundreds of millions of people have this shot on their arm, and we have heard some side effects, not for you concerning enough to not get the shot, which could keep you from dying, essentially.
Yeah, it's a risk-reward ratio. I mean, the risks of dying of COVID are far, far more serious and far, far numerically greater than vaccine side effects, most of which are mild, the sore arm syndrome, the bad headache. A few side effects with the Johnson & Johnson led to about 20 deaths mostly in younger women who don't need to take that vaccine. They have other options.
Right. John Moore, professor of microbiology and immunology, thank you so much for your time tonight and your insight. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.
It's a real-life story in pictures, how a small comic shop is taking on a hotel conglomerate in the most interesting and visual lawsuit you've probably ever seen. Plus, the president of Haiti has been assassinated. But how does that happen in the modern day? We'll discuss the factors at play there. And former President Trump suing some big tech companies, what he says Facebook, Twitter, and Google did wrong. Don't forget to follow us on social media at The Donlon Report on Twitter.
We're in a fight that we're going to win. We're in a fight that people want us to take on. So many people have said to me, please, sir, do something about big tech. Sue them, sir, sue them. And they've been saying it.
And that's what he did today. Former President Trump, who was banned from social media, is now suing tech giants Facebook, Google, and Twitter for violating his First Amendment rights. The former president says the big tech companies are so big, so powerful, they should instead be considered state actors, not private companies. News Nation's Tom Negevin joins us tonight with more from New York. Good evening, Tom.
Right. You know, Joe, good evening to you. Good to be with you. Very interesting array of reaction from legal experts, most of it a bit puzzled over this. We'll hear from one in particular in just a second. You almost need a program, though, to keep up with all the lawsuits and legal activity around the former president and the Trump organization. You remember last week here in Manhattan, the DA filed suit, or rather charges, against the Trump organization and its CFO over tax troubles going back 15 years. Allegedly, 2 weeks ago, the Trumps sued the city of New York over contracts canceled by Mayor Bill de Blasio in connection with the riots on Capitol Hill on January the 6th. The former president, the subject of multiple investigations himself, including one in the state of Georgia, over alleged meddling in the election results in that state. And now this, and the legal experts we're speaking to today, there have been many say that Jack Dorsey, CEO of Twitter, and Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook CEO, will not be losing a whole ton of sleep, they say, over the class action proposed lawsuits announced in Bedminster, New Jersey today. The experts call them frivolous, filled with holes, designed to distract from some of the other legal activity that's going on and to fundraise, a process that began minutes after the lawsuits were announced. Nancy Costello, among the experts we've been talking to, she's a First Amendment expert at Michigan State.
Well, I don't see this going very far. We've never had, under First Amendment law, someone just brought in as a state actor who's not a state actor. Facebook, Google, and Twitter are not closely affiliated with the government. So that kind of law just simply wouldn't apply here.
However, there is a major legal argument, a very interesting one, being made to cover that. The tech giants, the argument in the lawsuit is, have become so big, so powerful, so influential that they should, in fact, be treated as state actors, less like private companies, more like governments, even some say like nations. Legal analysts say that is a difficult argument to make in court, one that has no precedent, and they say that this is all about creating a stir, giving us something to talk about, something other than some of the other legal matters surrounding the 45th president of the United States, and fundraising. Tonight, the RNC has joined that effort, issuing an appeal and referencing these lawsuits. Joe?
Live for us tonight, New York, Tom Negevin. Thanks, Tom. Let's get more on this now from Social Flow CEO Jim Anderson, friend of the program as well. Jim, you just heard Tom's report there. Not many legal analysts giving this much of a chance. These are private companies. They can pretty much do what they want on those platforms. What do you think is behind this?
Yeah, Joe, we've talked about this time and time again. Freedom of speech is not the same as freedom of reach. Everybody's entitled to their day in court, including former President Donald Trump. And so, his day in court will come. And as you've heard the legal experts say, I don't think you have to be a lawyer to know that this is a bit of a long shot. It's more of an effort to rally the base and more of an effort to raise money than it is a serious legal argument.
Well, they're going to try the state actor line, it appears. And from what I've understood today, this has been tried before and it hasn't worked. I don't mean to have you put a legal hat on, but to your point, this is an argument that has apparently been brought to court and failed.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And again, there are plenty of legal scholars that you've talked to and had on air that tell you how little chance this is. But I think in some ways that misses the point. It's not really a legal argument. Yes, it's a lawsuit, and of course it's a legal argument on its face. But as we've talked about, and as you just talked about in your intro, it is an appeal to raise money. It's an appeal even more broadly to stay relevant. Former President Trump now needs to do things to stay in the public eye. If he wants to rally the base, he needs to do things. He needs to take action to rally that base. And he's a pretty litigious individual, judging by his business history. And so this is really straight out of the Donald Trump playbook. To file a lawsuit, whether you win or lose, is sort of immaterial. It's really an attempt to stay relevant and rally people to a position that he's taken.
On that note, Jim, what are you finding with your trends and the things you track as far as the former president's, I guess, draw on social media goes?
Yeah, we have something, Joe, called the Trump Index, which is just simply a metric of his relevance on social media. And of course, when he was president, he had lots of ways that he could stay relevant. He was president, so what he did almost by definition was news. Once he left office, of course, like many presidents, his relevance dropped, and he's really struggled to maintain that relevance. Many days, our index, which goes from a scale of 1 to 100, is down at 1, or even a little bit less than 1. So, he's got to do things, whether it be filing lawsuits, holding rallies, making other announcements to try to stay relevant. But we've noticed that he's not able to sustain that relevance. Even when he gets a bit of news and takes that number up into, say, the 20s or 30s, it oftentimes the very next day will drop back down to below 1.
Jim Anderson, Social Flow CEO, thanks for joining us. It's good to see you again.
Thank you.
He's got his gun. He's got your gun. What?
An officer shot during an arrest over a violent holiday weekend. What can we do about America's rising crime? And Haiti facing political turmoil after its president shot and killed overnight. What's next for that troubled island nation? Haiti's president has been assassinated. President Jovenel Moïse and his wife were attacked by a group of armed men at their private residence overnight. Some in the group claimed to be with the U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency, but President Biden and high-ranking Haitian officials deny those claims. First Lady Martine Moïse survived the attack and is now in Miami receiving treatment. Haiti's interim prime minister, Claude Joseph, has declared a state of emergency there, voicing concern about the political void left in the wake of the assassination. Haiti, the poorest country in the Americas, had already been dealing with widespread gang violence, inflation, long-standing protests against President Moïse. News Nation's Leland Vittert joins us now to discuss. And I guess the first question a lot of people wonder, even though it is Haiti, how in the world does a president of a country get assassinated in his house when he has a lot of security, I'm sure?
Well, and you said it in the very beginning, even though it's Haiti, operative word, it's Haiti, in terms of the level of security and discipline that they have there. As we take a look at video from the scene, understand that this is far different than the protection provided to a president of the United States or really presidents of any other place. Haiti is a third world country ruled by gang violence in so many ways. And this also was a pretty well-planned operation. As you noted, Joe, people were yelling, DEA operations, stand back. There was video taken of some of the gunmen. They appeared to be moving in a way that well-trained, well-orchestrated squad of gunmen. This was not a one-off kind of thing. So you have to ask yourself, okay, who wants the president of Haiti dead, and who has the resources in that poor of a country to hire those people to plan this kind of operation, to plan the getaway for this operation? Remember, this isn't a president in the way we think of a president. This is a man who basically turned himself into a strongman president. He'd already been extended by his term by more than a year and was trying to change the Constitution, as it were. Plenty of reasons for people to be upset. That
part of it was controversial as well. It has led to people in the streets. I mean, what's happening right now? We know gangs that are taking over the streets and kidnapping people. There's poverty, and it's a mess down there.
A mess would be putting it nicely, and it's been a mess historically. 60% of Haiti lives on less than $2 a day. There are slums everywhere. Gang violence runs rampant. You can see things in the street there. People are starving on a day-in, day-out basis. And remember, the United States has a very long history inside of Haiti. Back in 1915, there was a similar situation to what we saw just now. U.S. troops went in. They were there for 20 years trying to stabilize it and put in some kind of democratic tradition. 1994, U.S. troops went in, and they've never been able to bring democracy to this country. And it's a sad, sad story. You think about it, there were 3 democratic revolutions at the end of the 1700s. There was the United States Revolution, the French Revolution, the Haitian Revolution. One of those 3 did not work out so well.
A lot of painful history there, for sure, political history. But I guess, we all remember the earthquake in 2010. But I think what we look at now is the fact that a lot of people feel like it not only hasn't rebuilt, but it's gotten worse.
Far worse in many ways, and COVID really hasn't helped. The one thing that Haiti did have going for it, I don't know if we have a map of Haiti, but there was a small part there that one of the cruise lines turned into this enclave. They came in with their own construction crews. They built up an enormous facility there to bring in cruise passengers. It's a beautiful country, and that's gone away. So there is no economy right now, hence what the gangs being able to take over there in Haiti, which is sad in and of itself. The money that came in after the earthquake was never really spent very well to rebuild this country. And you've just seen strongman after strongman after strongman, difficult situation after difficult situation there. And this power vacuum only leaves a vacuum for more violence.
So what happens now? That's the big question. And beyond that, what will the U.S. role be in it? Because presumably there will be one.
If history holds true, things in Haiti are going to continue being as objectively miserable as they've been over the past 2 centuries, which has been to say it's been terrible. Just think, though, about it wasn't that long ago we had the Haitian boat people that were all coming over. And you think about what it takes for thousands upon thousands of people to risk everything, to leave home and to strap themselves to rafts that are nothing more than some cargo drums and oil drums lashed together with wood and float with their families in the hopes of finding the United States. There were tens of thousands of them. They had to be housed on U.S. bases in sort of camps as the U.S. figured out what to deal with them. It's so bad right now in Haiti, this is before the assassination, that the U.S. government issued waivers so that Haitians in the United States on visas didn't have to go home.
Certainly a situation we'll keep an eye on. Leland, thank you very much for the update. Sha'Carri Richardson is officially off the U.S. Olympic team after testing positive for marijuana use. We'll talk to a former NFL player to get his take on marijuana regulations in the sports world ahead. Plus, an officer shot as a suspect grabs a cop's gun in an elevator, one of hundreds of shootings over the past holiday weekend. We'll talk to a former police chief on stemming rising crime. One officer shot, another injured on the 4th of July as police in Las Vegas tried to arrest a suspect at a concert with handcuffs on in an elevator and his hands behind his back. Police say the 28-year-old somehow got more aggressive and grabbed hold of an officer's gun still in a holster. Here's how it unfolded on body cam.
We're here to help you.
Yeah, what the was that? He's got his gun. He's got your gun. What? I got it. Okay. You got it? Yeah. Is everybody okay? I got shot. Oh, get him a tourniquet, guys. Do you need a tourniquet?
One officer was hit in the leg, another with shrapnel. It was certainly part of a challenging weekend for police across the country, with 233 people killed, 618 injured in shootings nationwide. That's according to stats from the Gun Violence Archive. Daniel Linsky was the superintendent-in-chief of the Boston Police Department, now managing director at Kroll Security Risk Management. Chief, before we talk about some of the solutions, I want to ask you about the big picture and what's going on here. People are shooting into parties, into groups, at police, at kids. Why do you think we're seeing this increase?
Well, we've allowed our justice system to go too far the other way. So there definitely was a need to reform policing and reform our justice system. But we've got prosecutors who are no longer charging offenders for crimes they commit. We've got individuals who feel it's okay to attack police or to violently assault their neighbors and community members. And when they get arrested, go to court, and they're out the next day, there's no incentive for the community to come forward and help police do that because they're putting themselves in harm's way. So all of the the gains we made from the late 90s and 2000s of community policing initiatives, where we work with the community to develop strategies to proactively prevent crime, we've moved away from them. Departments cannot staff their resources right now, and they're responding to 911 calls instead of doing the proactive crime management and community policing they did before.
We hear a lot about bail reform. Do you think there are other issues involved here, Chief, as far as results from the pandemic, desperation, people being locked down? Are there other societal issues at play here, do you think?
Sure, we have huge economic issues that are impacting a lot of people in our communities. People were, the pandemic caused a lot of fear and anxiety. We also had a year of social unrest where people were not happy with police, and every police officer was determined to be unprofessional and possibly racist. So we eroded a lot of trust with the community. We have to build that back, and we have to invest in police resources, in training and in programs so that we can do things just like that. A police officer, just as in an elevator, a police officer shows up at every call with the ability to have his life taken from him or to have an innocent bystander taken. And that's something a lot of people don't understand when they, why do police put handcuffs on? Why do they use the tactics they do when arresting individuals? And it's because of situations just like we see on video.
Let's talk about another situation we're seeing more of, Chief, and it's just, I guess, general lawlessness and the chaotic nature of it. Crime, as you know, generally has a motive, but what do you do when you have hundreds of people who are swarming a downtown street like we saw in Chicago, groups that are gathering at an intersection in Oakland? We saw that as well. Here's the video from Chicago. Police are outnumbered. It's almost like anarchy. What are police supposed to do in situations like this?
So what we're asking police to do is to, document and take action later, because the last thing we want to do is take action that's going to cause physical violence between police and protesters or offenders. We need to get the community to help law enforcement police the community and to make sure that they're working with us, not against us. And that's something we had and something we've lost. And I think we've got to invest back in those relationships, put officers out of their cars, building relationships with community leaders so that the community is actually working with police to develop the safety and security strategy for their own neighborhoods. It's going to take time, it's going to take energy, it's going to take effort, and it's going to take some courage.
Time for sure, because we can't flip the switch on this to fix it, as we've apparently flipped the switch to break it, as we're seeing now. What would you do, Chief, if you were in the chair running one of these cities? You just touched on some of these. Let's just say you're in Chicago. I'm curious, a lot of people are demanding change. Do you think it's unfair to criticize a chief in one of these cities saying they're not doing enough? How much can you do when you have 100 people shot in a weekend?
So it's your job to do it, right? It's a tough job. And if you're sitting in the chief's job, it's your job to figure it out. And that's going out and making partnerships with community leaders who want to be engaged in a program for strategic planning going forward. It's putting cops on the streets. It's not reducing numbers of police officers, it's putting more cops on, and it's having cops do things to proactively target those violent offenders. We don't want to go in and sweep neighborhoods. We want to use intelligence-led policing to identify those gang members, those community members who are picking up guns and engaging in violence, and put all the resources to them. And then we need the district attorneys and the judges to hold those people accountable, as we did in the late 90s and 2000s, where we used federal authorities and district attorneys to bring gang members engaged in violence into large, long-term jail sentences where they had some accountability for their actions. We're not seeing that now, and we need to get back to that.
Daniel Linsky, former superintendent-in-chief of the Boston Police Department, now with Kroll Security Risk Management. Chief, thanks for your time. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
It's a bird. It's a plane. It's actually a lawsuit. How this comic book found its way into a courtroom. With Sha'Carri Richardson officially off the Olympic relay team, the World Anti-Doping Agency's marijuana regulations are coming under scrutiny. What Ricky Williams has to say about his cannabis use and changing the rules. That's ahead. A lot of outrage on social media over USA Track and Field's decision to leave Sha'Carri Richardson, the fastest American woman on the track, off the Olympic relay team after she tested positive for marijuana. Richardson was initially suspended for 30 days, which meant there was still a chance that she might be able to participate in the 4x100 relay late in the Olympics. But now she's not even on the roster. And in response, a lot of fans took to social media to show support for Richardson, some even calling for a boycott on watching the Tokyo Games, although Richardson seemed to be advocating against any kind of a boycott. One person showing support for Richardson is Ricky Williams, who had a record-breaking football career. The Heisman Trophy winner suspended from the NFL for using marijuana himself. And he's joining me now. Ricky, it's great to have you. I really appreciate your time. Let's start with your Twitter feed because you said this is some BS. They're still suspending people for this in 2021. I mean, the bottom line is we've come a long way, but we're not quite there yet, right?
Yeah, you know, and I'm speaking from personal experience, and it's a unique experience of being punished for my cannabis use, and so I understand what she's going through and what it feels like. But I think I've also come out on the other side, and I think the way that she's handling this is beautiful. She's looking past it to her future, but it's a statement, and I think because of this, it's forcing us to have these conversations, and I think we're going to see some regulations and rules change because of it.
How long do you think that'll take, Ricky? I mean, even the White House now today just said that this should be an issue that should be revisited. How far away are we, do you think?
Well, if the White House is saying this, the fact that we're having this conversation, and we haven't had this conversation in sports, it's all, I mean, I remember back in 2004 when I was going through my issues with the NFL, even the Players Association, who's supposed to stick up for the players, were mum. They were silent. They didn't say anything to stick up for me. And now we see people around the country, athletes, people from everywhere, standing up and saying something. So I think we've come a long way, but this is how change happens. And I feel so proud to be able to speak on this and to be a part of this.
USA Track and Field could have made a statement about this, Ricky. I mean, by allowing her to take part in the relay at the end, they could have said, look, she served her 30 days. We're good. Let's go. But they didn't. Do you think that's a mistake?
I think it's a missed opportunity. I came across an article the other day talking about companies now really relaxing their regulations around cannabis. Number one, because they see to retain young talent, they have to open their mind and they have to evolve. And so I think this was a great opportunity for U.S. Olympics to make a statement and really support the youth, because all the numbers show is cannabis is here to stay.
It's why you stepped away from the game, as you mentioned, in 2004. This particular situation is going to cost Sha'Carri Richardson a trip to the Olympics. Are you still upset, or I guess you picked the word, about what this cost you in your career?
Honestly, I'm not upset. I came across a post that Sha'Carri posted back in 2018, and it said, I'm more than just an athlete. And I think, it's one thing to say that, but the actual living that out means that sometimes you have to be controversial. And so I think if I hadn't gone through these things, I just would be another football player and no one would be wanting to talk to me right now. But I think because I stood for something, I was able to take, the platform of a professional athlete and turn it into something bigger than just sports.
Well, it's beautiful. Go ahead and finish your thought, Ricky.
No, I'm saying, and I think to me that at least for me, that feels more meaningful than just running up and down a football field. Well,
the beautiful part of your story, too, is it really took you stepping away from the game to find yourself. True?
Oh, yeah. And I think another issue that I think that this brings to the surface is a lot of us are in situations where we have to make a choice between, what the outer world says we should do and what our heart tells us we should do. And I think for me, I found that cannabis was extremely important for me to take care of myself. And I did that. And I've shown through my whole story that I walked away, I did things my way, and I came back. And now I'm so much healthier and happier than I've been before. And I am not ashamed to say, cannabis had a lot to do with that.
Yeah, and I think people will see this is not clearly a performance-enhancing drug. The question for a lot of people looking at your career is it's amazing that you ran for 10,000 yards in the NFL using marijuana. How did you use it? Did you ever smoke before a game?
No, I wasn't one of those guys. For me, I used it for recovery. Both mental recovery, emotional recovery, and physical recovery. I mean, for me, I'm a sensitive guy. And so being in a football locker room playing such a difficult sport was very stressful for me. And I found that cannabis helped me kind of reset my mind and get my mind right to get back up and do it again the next day.
Tell us about your mission right now, because you're on a mission to try to bring sports and cannabis together with your own company.
Yeah, I mean, it's from my own experience. You know, it's funny. I tell the story of when I was at the University of Texas running for the Heisman Trophy, and I was going through a really difficult time, and nothing I could do. I couldn't shake it. And my friend said, "Hey, you need to smoke some of this." And I kind of laughed at him and said, "I can't do this," but he convinced me to do it. And it was the first night that I was actually able to sleep. And it really helped me reset myself and learn to take care of myself. I ended up having back-to-back 300-yard games following that, and it really got me back on track. And so I think football, sports in general, is a metaphor for life, that we have to go out there and we have to conquer, and we have to battle and go through challenges and become successful. But we also have to learn to take care of ourselves so that we can keep doing it throughout our whole lifespan. Yeah. And I think it's cannabis for me if you use it consciously, it's a great way to take care of yourself.
Ricky, before we let you go, I want to get you on the new likeness image use rules for NCAA college athletes. You are in favor of them getting paid. Are you concerned at all about how this might go wrong?
Well, I think we have to be concerned. I think we just have to not take it away, but we have to think, what else can we add? And I think more education about money, about what to do with money, how to handle money, how to think about money, I think is extremely important. I know, at least from my personal experience, when I got to college, I didn't know very much about money. And I think me personally making money at that age, I would have gotten myself into a lot of trouble. So I think we just need to add some education to us and realize that money doesn't solve all of our problems.
Ricky, your story is fascinating. I've been a huge fan of yours as a player, and a big fan as well as how you've used yoga and astrology and spirituality to find yourself and find meaning in your life. And if you want to know more about that, you'll find him online. Just Google Ricky Williams and you'll learn all you need to know. Ricky, again, it's great to have you. Thank you for your time. All the best to you, my friend.
Yeah, this was great. Thank you.
Ricky Williams, former NFL running back and CEO of his own company now, Heisman. Aren't legal documents supposed to be boring? Coming up, we're going to explain how this comic book found its way into a Texas courtroom, entered as evidence. Don't forget, you can follow us on social media at the Donlon Report on Twitter. All right, a Houston comic book store is suing the hotel next door in a way that only a comic book store could, in comic book form. These are real pictures of Third Planet Sci-Fi Superstore's lawsuit against the Crown Plaza River Oaks. The store, which has been a staple of Houston for 46 years, says it repeatedly tried to get the hotel to stop allowing guests to throw objects onto its roof. When Third Planet eventually filed suit, it decided to illustrate the issue to make its point. That's just what they did. Joining me now is the attorney leading this case for Third Planet Sci-Fi Superstore, Chris Feldman. Chris, this is such an interesting story. All that law school, and you're drawing pictures.
Well, I can't take credit for the pictures themselves.
True.
I had to hire a comic book artist to do that, a longtime client of Third Planet. And real quick, I just want to do a shout out to fellow Longhorn Ricky Williams. It's an honor to follow him.
Right, yeah, that was a fun interview. So, Chris, tell me how you got this idea. Who came up with it? I know we'll talk more about the problem here in a minute, but who decided let's do this in comic book form?
Well, when one of the defendants, Pacifica, an out-of-state entity that owns the Crown Plaza, filed their answer, they actually tried to strike our original pleading where it discussed the history and the importance of Third Planet to Houston. I mean, Third Planet comic book and sci-fi is a staple to Houston. It's an institution, and they wanted the judge to strike it, all that dialogue from our pleadings. And I realized we literally need to illustrate for this entity, for the owners of the hotel, what they're dealing with. And that's what we did. We put it in comic book form, and to prove a point that they were messing with the wrong store.
This wasn't filed by itself, right, Chris? There was the actual lawsuit filed, and then this was sort of an addendum or augmenting material, correct?
Right. It was in the middle of the actual pleadings. It's in the middle of the lawsuit, and it's the caption before it says origin story. Then you turn the page and you get to the comic book.
Right. So the comic book does bring a little levity to it, and it's certainly given you a lot of attention. But the case here and the damages are very serious.
Oh, extremely serious. What happened was one night, hotel guests apparently went up to the 18th floor and threw 16 large fire extinguishers from a balcony and some of those hit the roof of my client, Third Planet. And that's not the first time. This had been going on over and over many years, but it reached a level to where human life was actually put in jeopardy. And the owner, Mr. Johnson, had no choice but to file a lawsuit. And we decided to do it in a very graphic way.
So have you approached, I'm sure, the hotel? You've gotten to this point where you're filing suit, but have they been unwilling to do anything to try to rectify this? Maybe there's some sort of a barrier or something they can put across your roof so this doesn't happen?
This has been going on for many, many years, and they've never done anything. And we still haven't gotten a response from them in terms of what they are willing to do to fix the problem, much less pay for the roof that's been damaged and everything else that's going to disrupt the business when the roof is actually replaced.
Meantime, they're saying that this isn't really their problem. It's a criminal mischief issue with their guests, right?
Well, the issue is that it's constantly an issue of criminal mischief at this hotel. This particular hotel harbors a lot of illicit activity, including people throwing fire extinguishers off balconies. So at some point, you have to take responsibility yourself for allowing your premises to be used as a launching pad for projectiles that are aimed at the roof of a neighboring business.
What's next, Chris? Have you heard from the judge at all?
I've not heard from the judge. The case will be advancing to trial, which will be in early 2022, and we fully intend to hold this corporate entity, this hotel and its owners, 100% responsible for the outrageous conduct it's allowed on its premises for many years, including all these fire extinguishers being thrown out.
Have you been surprised by the reaction from the comic book?
Yes, we weren't really prepared for that, but it seems to have struck a chord. And I think it points to something, and that is we all need a little bit of levity from time to time when dealing with serious issues,
Sure.
and that you can use levity to nonetheless illustrate a very serious point and problem.
Chris Feldman, attorney for Third Planet Sci-Fi Superstore. Chris, it's great to talk to you. Thanks for your time. We appreciate it. And for the record, we did reach out to the hotel and did not hear back from them. Chris, thanks again.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Tonight's Bite of the Night, New York City held its first ticker tape parade in nearly 2 years to honor the essential workers who got them through the COVID-19 pandemic. Thousands of healthcare workers, delivery drivers, bus operators, grocery store workers, frontline heroes marched through the city's Canyon of Heroes. Here's a bit of it. Boy, that's great to see, for sure. We thank them all, and we'll always remember banging the pots and turning on and off our lights at 9 o'clock each night. Thanks for joining us. Prime's next.